Hey, it's Fred at The Words We Don't Say. In today's episode, we're going to be showing a podcast that we originally recorded as part of the Heroes Wellness Collective. And when the Heroes Wellness Collective shifted gears, we knew that the conversations that we'd had that we hadn't been able to air yet were important. They were important to the people we talked to, and they'd be important to the community at large, the community of veterans, first responders, and just plain old American citizens. So, we wanted to honor those conversations and air them here. But of course, didn't want you to come here, watch an episode and see a different background and think, what is this? And am I in the right spot? I can assure you, you are in the right spot. And this is just an older episode, different background, same types of conversations. What we're talking about here are the types of conversations that we feel people, need to have to lead better lives. In some cases, it's because maybe they've experienced trauma and they're learning to heal and they're walking through that journey. Or in some cases, they're transitioning maybe from a life of service in the military or as a first responder to something different, and they need some assistance in making that transition. In other cases, it's just how can we, together live a better life. And that's why we started The Words We Don't Say, to shed some light on those words, the words that help us live better lives, heal from trauma, and move forward. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode and didn't want you to be shocked when you saw a different background. As always, take care of each other. Bye. Today's guest, Pat Flood from Owners in Honor, and we're going to be talking to Pat about something that I don't think gets as much play as it should, and that's the role of finance and your job and your mental wellness, and definitely a strong point for transitioning well out of the military. So, Pat, welcome, man.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're 26 years in the Army, retired, Green Beret. You got out and went from special operations to Duke to get an
Yeah.
MBA. So then you stepped into the financial business sector, and then what was the point where you're like, hey, there's something missing, and I'm the guy that can help out here.
Yeah, so I think, it was partly it was something that was gnawing at me even from the very beginning, and I think a lot of the reason that a lot of us serve is initially, and a lot of the transition organizations do a good job, whether it's the Honor Foundation, Commit Foundation, Special Operators Transition Foundation, and really dividing down all the way to the root cause of what makes you you in your mind, and so what motivates you. And for me, it was that I wanted to be able to be in a position to be able to serve others and be a good servant leader. That's really sort of the crux of it ultimately is like understanding the fact that the reason I want to do anything really is to be able to serve other people. And so when I went from commanding a recruiting battalion with 300 people and engaging, an environment of 14 million people within Los Angeles and having really an outsized impact, engaging with the mayor, the superintendent of schools, you name it, of the second largest city in the United States. And then I went into finance, which is great. They paid me well, and it was a great company, good ethos. I thought I would be fine without a veteran network. It was just a chapter of my life, and I've moved on past it. And then when I was working there for 3 years, I realized that it was something that I really missed. And a lot of the reason I think I missed it is there's two things. One, I think, and you and I have talked about it before, I think there's a love element that is sort of unspoken, of unconditional love that you develop for your brothers in arms, sisters in arms, that I don't think when we're serving, we can really put our finger on it. But I think when we leave the service, it feels like we went through a bad breakup and we don't know why. It's like you haven't really tied off loose ends, like, because you feel like there's still something that you have to give, and I couldn't figure out a way to do it. So, what I was one of the co-founders of the Veterans Affinity Circle within Anderson, so the employee resource group. That was okay, and that didn't really seem to satisfy it. So then I started working with the Honor Foundation, which is a veteran transition organization for special operators, mainly as a corporate entity to be able to help them find placement for people within Anderson. But then because of COVID, I ended up at a night with the Honor Foundation where they had both the entrepreneur panel and also the corporate panel. And in that, I listened to the way that entrepreneurship was being presented, and it was really being presented only in one flavor. And I happened to be at the time overseeing and interacting quite a bit with the mergers and acquisitions and valuation services at Anderson. because we had just acquired them from a different company. And my dad's an entrepreneur and a veteran, and my grandfathers were both entrepreneurs and veterans. And that's kind of where the story ends because I'm a third generation American. So it's something that was strange to me that the other opportunity wasn't being presented. And then there was a gentleman that night who I would call a good natured pirate. So he's a special boat team guy, E8, who, very frankly said, the reason I joined this transition organization was to be able to be an entrepreneur. I don't know Emmett Smith, and I don't think I'm going to found Black Rifle Coffee Part Two. So how in the F can you help me? And it was just emptied. There was just silence. And so I was like, that's interesting. I went to Duke. I have a good network from work. Maybe I could help him. So I tried to help him for about 3 or 4 months, tried to connect him to resources, and I couldn't. And I was like, I'm failing this guy. I have no idea how the veteran ecosystem is laid out. I don't know which nonprofit does what. And the resources he needed felt very niche. And it was difficult for me, who is a person who understood the language, to be able to find them the right resource. And so from that, kind of put a pin in it really. And because I was in my first transition job, and really I was having some personal issues as well that had to do with transition between me and my now ex-wife. And I was like, I got too many glass balls in the air. I need to be able to focus on the ones that are closest to me now. But then I had an opportunity to move to Houston again because of family stuff. But in that opportunity, which initially I thought was it was a little bit more probably response to crisis versus that it was actually an opportunity. I thought at the time gave me the opportunity to talk to a mentor, a guy that you and I both know, Chad Faulkner. Chad had said, I think this is the only time in your life that you could really figure out, based on change of cost of living from California to Texas, if you can afford to do a startup and can you afford to not get paid for a year and a half. And I was like, you're crazy. That's the dumbest thing I would ever do. Like, why on earth would you not take a paycheck for a year and a half? And what it really came down to it is like, one, my faith tell me. Two, what did my personal character statement that came out of the Honor Foundation and SOTF tell me? And I was like, I'm not doing something that I feel is worth doing. And I know I can do it, but it reminds me of even in service, I think you would admit that I was a good signal officer, but I was never a great signal officer because I wasn't interested in network communications. I just wasn't. I was a good officer because I wanted to be a good officer, but I was learning to do the communication stuff in spite of the fact that I had no interest in it. I felt like this is the same thing. It almost felt like me stepping off to go to selection. It was the same thing. Like, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. It may not be the right fit for me, but if I don't take a chance, then I'm going to regret not having tried it because I think that there's a need out there that I think I can help fill the bill.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You talk about a couple of components that people overlook when they're transitioning, right? You mentioned faith and family, friends. You mentioned finance. There's that other F that right people don't talk about, which is sort of the fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I had a career. I stood on this mountain, and what mountain do I want to stand on next, and how do I climb that?
Yeah, and uh, going through transition is like it reminds me now. So I had the fortune of, like, when I was in ROTC, to meet some Vietnam veterans, right? Now that I'm on the other side of that table and I'm the, GWAT veteran talking to a guy without a Calmet patch. And like I realized that talking to someone about the importance of fulfillment who's transitioning, it doesn't sound real. It sounds like you're theorizing about something. But
Mhm.
because I'll be the first to admit that after going to Duke and being a battalion commander and living in LA and having opportunities in finance, my main goal was pay me, MFer. And that was it. Like, I've earned it. I'm gonna get paid. And when I talked to other people that were getting out, I was like, I always talk to them about make sure you understand your market value. If you get locked into a salary when you first come in and it's below market value, it's really hard for a company to change that. So I talked to them about that, move to where the money is, like all of that stuff. And now that I've gone through it, I'm like, all right, that's sort of still true. I'm not going to say that it's not true because I don't want to see veterans underemployed or undercompensated, which happens a lot because we do a terrible job at salary negotiation in our first jobs. But I would say that understand what your light at the end of the tunnel is. The thing that you're doing initially, and you would probably agree to this, is maybe a little bit mercenary. It may be that you're you do need to make some money doing something, whether it's in defense contracting or whatever, as a bridge to be able to do the thing you really want to do. Because what's most important is that you're putting food on the table right when you're getting out, not necessarily that you're finding your perfect dream job ever.
Yeah, I think, right, it has to come in, sequences, and oddly enough, you would think as, military planners, we would understand phases of an operation, right? And, and be like, "Okay, hey, the initial phase is this," right? But I think there's other things that, that you mentioned there that affect people's mental health that they don't really consider when they're, separating. It's like, okay, that might be a phase, but what other phases might you need? Do you wanna live next to your family? Is there a place that you wanna live? Is there an environment that you wanna be in? Those sorts of things, I think, too often don't get
Yeah.
that when people are chasing a dollar. And you mentioned, 2 types of entrepreneurship, and I wanna, make sure this
Right.
listening really understand. It's like, it's what you're helping people do or trying to help people do is not so much start a business, right? Because sometimes that's okay, idea, capital, connections, but you're helping them identify businesses that might be in the sector that they would like, or something they would be good at, or a business that's getting ready to sell that they might be able to step into and help lead. So if you can kind of explain that more in depth, owners and honor, what's the process?
Yeah. So for us, we're not big believers in an accelerator or sort of incubator format, which is usually a time-based, not conditions-based education program. For us, it's really a condition-based education program. So you start in, you say, "Hey, I'm a veteran, or I'm a Gold Star family member, or I'm a military spouse. I'm interested in entrepreneurship." You'll come to us typically through the website. You go to the buy, inquiry, and then from that, then we will do an initial interview to understand whether or not we're even the right program for you. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about entrepreneurship, I think, within the space where sometimes all entrepreneurship sounds like it's the same, like you're just going to be a business owner. Like there's a lot of service to CEO sort of stuff that that really focuses on starting your own business. It doesn't really help you. And to be clear, within like finance, venture is way different than private equity. And the money works different, the partnerships work different, the players are different. But when you're coming at it, they're both entrepreneurship. They're both methods of entrepreneurship. And so for us, the people that are doing the venture stuff, starting out something new, need a different kind of help and usually a much more intense type of help because you have to be able to prepare a product for market, understand market saturation, market differentiation, and really see if you can enter a lot of times already a very competitive market. And so where we're different is that we're looking at something that's a lot more akin to what military personnel are used to, which is taking something that someone else is turning over to you and seeing if you can steward that legacy company into a way that you can improve things that maybe that legacy owner just didn't get around to or was unable to based on either other priorities or lack of capital or lack of interest or whatever. And so for us, really, it's the first stage is we call it the base camp, buyer base camp, and you're there really for a couple phases of the 6 phases, and of those phases, one is really basic education, and then the second part is where you do an exercise at the end of it called the buy box exercise, which then narrows down what it is that you're looking for. But you can stay in that phase one infinitely because the goal is not to push you into searching for a business, which is where the true expense really starts coming in. It's to educate you so you know what you're getting into so that one, what's your personal financial situation? What's your family situation? What is it that's driving me? Because businesses fail that are acquired. So 2 out of 3 businesses aren't profitable within the first 3 to 5 years that are acquired. And the reasons typically are one of three. One is a poor acquisition. And more often than not, that has to do with not knowing yourself. So not knowing how much money you actually need to make every month or year, and then over acquiring something that's far too complex that you don't need to necessarily operate. The second reason is lack of experience. So veterans do have great experience that's transferable, but sometimes not technical experience. In which case, then you need to focus on what leadership experience do I have? Have I had multiple additional duties? Have I had to flex in different places in the country or world? Have I had to coordinate with units that are supporting, or have I worked with vendors? Have I ever been a PA agent? Like all of that stuff. That those are skills that would help you do that, and then we help out because we provide people with business advisors that then narrow the opportunity cost of them having to learn versus finding someone to help them. And then the last reason really is personal issues. So the personal issue part is again knowing yourself, but knowing yourself in a different way. So knowing yourself of, have I communicated well to myself or my family what it is my 10-year plan is, what my horizon is, why I'm doing this to begin with, how how I am going to operate within a, if crisis were to happen, who do I talk to first? And then what are the rest of my resources laid out to me? So we're only focused on entrepreneurship through acquisition or buying, operating, and selling businesses. We are not helping people with mental health. We're not doing any of that stuff. So we have a process where every veteran who goes through a program goes through some other transition program. And then we are partnered with those other programs so that if it comes up to us, we can pivot somebody out to the appropriate agency because we're not trying to do everything for everyone. There's secondary and tertiary benefits, of course, to mental health for being able to, one, command your own future, be fulfilled in a path to purpose, be surrounded by community. And then one of the interesting things that comes up is that, going back to that initial value proposition that we talk about with transition organizations is to go where they're going to pay you the amount of money that you should get paid.
Mhm.
What's interesting about acquisition is that you could say, hey, really what I want to do is move to Boise, Idaho. And then how do I do that? And then there may be a bridging solution that tells you to get a different job to be able to pay the bills. But in the meantime, then we'll help you search for a business in the place that you actually want to live. That takes a massive amount of psychological stress off of people because it's one where they pick, typically them and their family. And then secondly, more often than not, it's because they either grew up there or some other member of their family lives close by. So it creates that other support system that's nice. When I was recruiting, and I can't remember if it was a big factor for you guys or not, but it was said to us that over 80% of service members that enter the military would like to return to their home of record, and less than 30% do. So if you can, connect those tissues of one, how do I get you back home into a place that, quite frankly, that's really who you were serving to begin with? Like you weren't, if you're from Boise, Idaho again, you're not serving, when you join up, you're not thinking, man, I'm defending New York City. You're thinking, I'm defending the people that I grew up with, my cousins, my family, my church, my community. Not to mention the fact that if you can get back to your community as a veteran, we've had millions of dollars of the best leadership lab ever. And generally speaking, veterans end up going into a large corporation and then they become a grain of sand on the beach as far as their impact. When you move to a smaller community, your impact is outsized in a way that is unreal. And it creates that same effect that's post World War II, where almost 50% of the small businesses were owned by veterans. Granted, there's some other contributing factors to that. There was a lot of veterans then. But at the same time, there's also now less than 5% of small businesses are owned by veterans.
The other thing I think about that statistic is, if you ask somebody when they enter the military what's important, it's probably not what's gonna be important 20 years,
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
So the fact that, 80% are saying, "Hey, I wanna return," lots of things change,
Yeah,
oh,
myself included. I couldn't wait to get out of my small town.
yep.
Couldn't wait. And now that I've, been to combat and seen a lot of other places, I dream of the day that I can. And it's it's the different phases of your life, and so that's why this is something that it's not a do it to time sort of thing, it's a do it to standard, and so it could be that you're about to transition out and you're thinking about doing it as, an immediate step right out after you get out, and that's great. That probably means you're super personally educated, like self-educated, and you're probably very motivated, and you may even have access to capital. More often than not, what we're finding is the people that we're engaging are people that have been out 3 to 5 years. They've been doing some other thing, and they're missing the fulfillment, and they're missing the sense of control over their own life. Just this last weekend, it was said to us, I didn't mind when Uncle Sam was sending me this stuff because I really thought that where Sam was sending me mattered. But when the company that I was just working for was telling me to do the exact same thing and expressing it as though it was a combat deployment, I had a really hard time with that. And I was like, yeah, I could see how that's the case.
Yeah, I remember saying that to someone who was really excited about something in the company I worked for, and I was like, like, "Hey, man, nobody's dying. We're not curing cancer. I mean, it's gonna be okay, right?"
It's gonna be
Ye
okay.
One of the things I know that your organization is committed to, you talk about stewardship and
Mhm.
that sort of long event horizon where this isn't, "Hey, you're gonna show up, we're gonna throw business acronyms at you for 6 weeks and then, have fun storming the castle as we kick you out." But, this is more like a 10-year process in some cases. I know that you
Mhm.
guys are committed to long term. Can you sort of explain, where that came from and why that is?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it came from, quite frankly, being a Green Beret. A lot of the relationships we had, like I served 2 years in Peru, and even to this day, we're helping them do stuff. And I would say that part of the reason that initially went down there as part of the future operations office at SOC South to close it. And when I did my assessment, I was like, I don't think we need to close it. We need to send the right advisors down, and we need to consider where we're putting our effort in. And it's a novel idea, but we may want to talk to the Peruvians and what they think. Do they even want us there right now? And if they do, how do they want us there? And so that's what we did. And Admiral Brown was great. He was the commander of SOC South at the time. He was like, yeah, take 30 days, go talk to whoever you needed to talk to, which is between him and Admiral McCraven just giving me sort of carte blanche to go talk to anybody. That was fantastic. I'd be like, oh, I'm coming here in the behalf of a 4-star, kind of big deal, Navy SEAL. But from that, I got into a lot of doors and asked a lot of questions. And what you realize is that the relationships that we're creating, like, and I would say that it's funny because it's directly applicable to what's going on in special forces. The number of guys that are like, I don't, JSETs are dumb. I don't want to do it. Like, I'm not going to combat. You're like, no, no, no. That's actually the heart of our work. So the heart of our work is developing relationships that in a time of crisis, they know they have someone that they can rely on. And the process of this is that ultimately it's a crawl, walk, run, where as soon as the veteran feels that they can stand on their own 2 feet and don't need us anymore, they could disengage from us. But we wanted to make sure that we were contractually obligated to them for the duration, essentially the most critical time, which is when they have debt. So most debt that you get from a bank is about a 10-year time horizon. So we wanted to make sure we were engaged with them as long as the debt was engaged with them. And what's nice about that is the banks like that too. So the bank likes the fact that you're getting an advisor that's not the bank, that if they have problems, you can help them with their problems. Because otherwise, they're usually the ones on the hook trying to help you with everything from marketing to how do what's going on with your revenue to let me connect you with an accountant. What's your taxes looking like? Because they want you to pay your loan. And so they like the fact that you're getting another advisor. The other part though is that it's a lot of lessons learned. I think that we got from helping set up training courses in other countries is that like there were some things that I think both you and I saw in South where it was like, hey, part of our selection process is you get blindfolded and jump off a bridge backwards. And you're like, one, how does that apply directly to what it is you're doing anywhere? Two, you're injuring a third of the people in your course, and there's no way to get them back in the course. So just looking at it from a financial baseline, the amount of expense that you're putting into initially finding people, bringing them here, and then training them, and then you're breaking them during training doesn't make any sense. And so from that perspective, it was that how many of the people that when you're looking at that are interested in entrepreneurship acquisition are ready right now to go and they're 100% ready? Not that many. So I'd say less than 10% of the veteran community is probably actually ready to just jump out the door, even people that have identified that they want to buy something. And so for us, it was really to look at those second and third echelons down and say, what do those folks need to be able to either one, be acquainted with the fact that this is a possibility for them, because I think a lot of veterans right now are only acquainted with the startup possibility for entrepreneurship. And secondly, to have the ones that are acquainted with it be able to get enough education to really be able to withstand first contact, to have a much higher level of survivability. And so for us is what we looked at those 3 factors that cause business acquisitions to fail, and we looked at the program and said, "Okay, let's set up a program that mitigates those factors very intentionally and deliberately." And that you have to cross over those factors or go through the modules before we even allow you to look for a business within our program. And that can be happen that's really self-paced. You can do it super fast, and give us feedback and say, hey, I got this, or I'm already this far along in my process. I'm just going to clap out of it, or, essentially take a test or have an interview that says, hey, I already got this part, which great. We just want to make sure that when you're getting the market, our product is the buyer. So if our product is coming to market and unable to differentiate themselves because they are not better than every other product in the market, which is what a startup has to figure out, is that, and it's funny because we're helping people not do startups, but we are in essence a startup, is that our product really is the differentiated value of a prepared buyer who is a veteran, who has a good story to tell. And a great way to use it as a parallel is similar to helping a veteran buy a house in a housing market. Veterans were still able to do it, even though they're, volunteered to PCS. The way that they were able to do it is they sent letters to sellers and they said, hey, I care about this community. This is who I am. And a lot of times sellers then would sell houses to them, even under the cash value that someone else wanted to buy their house for.
Yeah. And Pat, I know you guys have this optimization platform. Sort of explain what that is.
Yeah, so it's a couple of different things. So one, it's there's something that we use with a partner of ours that's enabled with AI that helps bring in a lot of the financial data for an organization. But really the magic of that is not the system. System is just a system. So it's really the fact that they get a small business advisor and also an executive coach while they're running the business. And then they are connected to allied service providers that are everything from fractional HR companies, fractional CFO companies, fractional accounting companies, et cetera, that we've already vetted that are partners of ours that then provide either, or usually both, a free assessment to the veteran and then also discounted services for 1 year for us to be able to close that opportunity cost gap and make it cost effective faster so that they can pay off their debt faster. And quite frankly, get us off their back as a monkey, because we do not intend to be able to be their micromanager forever or run them with a 10,000-foot screwdriver. We want them to be able to mitigate the initial hardest part, which is the first 5 years. And then at 5 years, they have the opportunity to then disengage from us.
A lot of small businesses, they don't have that succession plan, right? So the original owner founder is getting ready to leave, and they're getting ready to shutter the business. So is that
Yeah, of the 9 million businesses that are expected to sell within the next 10 years, over 85% don't have a transition plan.
so? How do you go about finding those?
There's a couple different ways. Some of it is, secret sauce. I can't really say it on the call, otherwise everyone will take it. No, just kidding. So it's really pretty straightforward. So it's one, we work with vetted brokers. So we have a search and acquisition director who's a former broker who works with all of the veterans to be able to help them search for stuff. So it's like a quarterback or, a combat advisor that's basically looking at your partner, watching them do stuff, not actively involved in what they're doing, but able to give them feedback and take everything from the initial financial documents you get from a company to go through the diligence of the company or be able to understand what are the obstacles and opportunities as you're about to buy the company. But then we also have a network of national brokers that then we link into. And what we do is we have our buyers in what we call it a buyer bulletin. So we have all of our ready buyers, of which right now we have 16 people that are ready to buy. So they're capital ready. They've defined an area. They know their timeline. They can get an SBA loan. And so from all of that stuff, then we are providing it to brokerage franchises. So the brokers are typically part of a big franchise. And then we provide it to the franchise owner. And we also provide it to something called the Exit Planning Institute. So the Exit Planning Institute is 9,000 certified exit planning advisors that advise annually about 90,000 businesses. All those businesses are part of that 15% of people that have decided that, yes, I do want to exit. I do want to have a deliberate exit. This is my plan. And so what we're doing is we're getting the veteran in front of these people that are selling their businesses, a lot of times even without a broker, or we're upending what typically would happen in the system, which is where a broker or a buyer or a veteran would go and Google business broker, a buy side broker. They would then have a retainer or potentially a monthly cost to be able to then provide them financial information about targeted companies. And there's no guarantee that they're ever going to find anything. The worst case scenario is we have an SF guy that's in our program that spent $115,000 over the course of 18 months and never bought a business. And so we make sure none of that stuff happens. And what we do is we help them look in a way that they would have done on their own in a much more robust way than a single broker could ever do. And that's the main way that we bring them. The second way that we do it is that we're in the process of 2026 connecting to the National Association of Veteran-Owned Businesses and the National Small Veteran Business Association, which are two different national organizations that then connect small business owners that are veterans. And we're going to be speaking at their conferences and talking to the veteran owners. Because starting in 2026, what used to happen is if I was a veteran-owned business and I had certificates tied to revenue, that I said, hey, here's a government contract that I got because it's set aside because I'm a veteran-owned business. If you don't have another veteran who can match those certificates in the future, then you're not going to be able to transfer them anymore. So now in 2026, you're going to find a lot more veteran-owned businesses who are motivated to find a veteran specifically because they're going to get a higher valuation or a higher price for their business when they sell it.
Yeah, and that brings me to something I wanted to ask. I mean, what things have you seen, or did you think about that particularly makes veterans well suited to run a small business? And then how do you marry that with your training to? What do you tell the small businesses when you're saying, "Hey, this person is the right person"? What things are you highlighting?
Yeah. So one of the main things that we talk about when and this isn't just us, this is almost any broker in the country when they're trying to present a buyer who's a veteran to a company, is that we talk about the fact that we're very community oriented, that we are essentially trained to be good stewards of whatever we're taking over, understanding that our experience within a unit is typically temporal and that eventually we're going to move on, but we're trying to leave something better than we found it. Rarely do we feel like we need to, upend everything and change all the coins of the unit and the unit logo and crest and everything. It happens, but it rarely happens because more often than not, what you really want to be able to do is grow the business. And then the third part is really veterans focus a great deal on developing, mentoring, and coaching human capital. And at the end of the day, when you're at a small business with 7 employees, that's $1 million business. The most important thing are those key employees. So if you have, Agatha in tennis shoes, who's been running billing for the last 20 years, if I were a non-veteran, or if I came strictly from a financial background, I may do an assessment of my key employees and say that I can replace her with AI or I could replace her with a system. But I didn't know the fact that she also knows, essentially where all the bodies are buried, is the main connector to all of our customers and all the other stuff. And so veterans ask those questions. So a great analogy or a great story is our first case study is that when we had a veteran, we were the 12th offer in a business. And all the other offers were from people either from private equity or from self-funded searchers that were all like MBA types. And nothing against them. Of course, I'm one. But they were very focused on the financials of the company. And so when our veteran came in, he had been coached to talk about the key employees, talk about what the person selling the company did before they owned the company. What would they have done if they held on to the company? How would they have grown the company, changed the company? What would they change? And what was the impact that they had in their local community or things that mattered to them? And so as it turned out, he was the only one to find out that they were giving, I think, well over $100,000 to local charities in order to provide a meal program to a school. The person who was owning the business was actually the wife, not the husband, even though some of the other buyers had only talked to the man when they were in the room. So that was a pretty good thing. The veteran didn't automatically assume that because there was a man and a woman in the room that the man was the person who was in charge, because we're used to having a lot of units that are commanded either by men or women, and I think we're pretty blind to a lot of it. I think a lot of it is we're just like whoever's in charge, whatever, that's the person in charge. And so, and then that person had been a 30-year FBI special agent and no one had asked that. So then it created a point of contact. And then it was, you know, what is your financial plan personally when you're exiting the business, what you want to do, and then how can I help you once I take over your company? What input would you like to have? What are the things that I need to know? And it was very humble in the presentation of, yeah, I want to take over this thing that you've built over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, but I also want to make sure that I'm not ripping it apart because you've put a lot of care into this. And now, so that's a single generation business, right? So now a lot of these businesses that are about to be sold are sometimes second generation or third generation businesses. And now imagine the pressure that the seller may have to not just sell the thing that they consider their baby, but it could be their whole family's American story. Like everything that they've ever known, to include all their grandparents and great grandparents, are tied up into that business. And that company's impact on that community, little league, gymnastics, the high school, like all this stuff, they've probably been a part of all of it. And that's the stuff that really helps. The other part, going back to what we were talking about, is transitioning into a place that you want to transition into, is that veterans coming home, the effect is it's so much more impactful, I think, than even a veteran showing up just in general. And I think veterans generally have pretty good reputations across the country. But if you come back home to a community where now everyone's been sort of watching you and CNN, Fox News about how amazing your impact has been, but you were, a knucklehead until you left high school, is that now you're coming back and you're a changed person and you remembered in recruiting. And I know that soft recruiting is a little bit different than ours, but to see those reunion events that we would have when kids came back from basic training and they were like a new human being to their parents, and just to see the emotion wash over their parents and then to present that to the communities that we were in was just, to me, still that lights my heart up every time I think about how we were changing lives for the positive. Now imagine also the impact of recruiting and retention is that if you can bring these folks all the way back home and they become a business owner and they contribute to the community, they're more likely to hire veterans, more likely to vote, more likely to give to charity, more likely to be a part of the local government, more likely to reach out to a neighbor, more likely to respond in crisis. All of these things are like, now I'm thinking like a recruiter, I'm like, oh, that'd be brilliant. Now instead of having the 300 recruiters, I have 300,000 that are all coming back telling great stories and then contributing back into their community instead of, unfortunately moving to either Texas or Florida because the taxes are better for us, which is, and you may or may not know this, but that was the biggest obstacle I had in recruiting. Like personally, was that if Johnny or Jane are going to leave Los Angeles and I'm never going to see them again. And it was like, no, 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 no. We have this partnership for youth success thing. We're going to bring it back home. We're going to get them a job here. We want them to actually commit here because it's going to, quite frankly, help us with recruiting.
Uh, all right. A couple of times here you've mentioned, recruiting and the impact it had on you post service. And I know we mentioned I also went to recruiting command, and I can remember myself, taking a moment to grieve, right? And 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 I hate, personal word that I dislike is the word career, right? So when anybody
Mm,
ever used the word around me, I would always say, "Hey, man, we don't have those. You are serving." Uh, y- so you're serving, and
yeah.
you're allowed to have a preference, but let's not override the preference. But I do remember, getting selected to command and recruiting and thinking, that I'd done something wrong. It's like, hey, what I do, what I do wrong. The only place I've ever been in my life is in operational units, and now all of a sudden I'm going to recruiting. But turned out to be a wonderful experience for me, an enlightening experience, one where you really get to impact the army
Mm,
in a positive way. And for me, it was as a soft recruiter. For you, bringing people into the army, I think you learn a lot during that experience. And I would always, subsequent to that experience, when people would tell me, hey, I'm going to recruiting, or I'm getting ready, I want to decline, and my point would always be like, oh, so you're one of those people that believe that not all soldiers deserve good leadership, right? That's what
mhm,
you're going to.
yeah.
And then like, oh man, I'm gonna shame you into taking that job. Um, and like just going there and doing well by it. So can you explain some of the other benefits?
The positive points about recruiting.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, honestly, I could probably go on, and it's funny because I think I discovered along the line the same thing that you discovered. I had the opportunity to find it out, though I think maybe earlier in my career because I had also an opportunity to get blown through a wall and break my neck, and was had to fight a med board to stay in the army. They almost rebranched me to a different branch because I couldn't jump out of airplanes for 2 years. That got waived. I was able to go to South instead while I rehabbed. So I had to come to terms early with maybe this isn't like I'm gonna keep doing what I can and serve where I can. And I am probably, but that I mean, let's just be honest. Almost from the point of commissioning, for me, it was really more about service than me doing exactly the right job in the Army. I got commissioned as an armor officer. And then the Army said, hey, check it out. We're just going to downsize by a third, and we're going to put all these combat arms dudes in the reserves. Oh, by the way, we've also reorganized the National Guard and the reserves. So there are no combat arms units in the reserves. So you're just in IRR. And like for guys like me, who's an English major, I did not exactly have the most practical route to employment after that. And I was just like, oh my goodness. And my brother went to the academy, and we had a lot of heart to hearts along that time where I was like, I'm just gonna bide my time and do what I need to do to be able to get over my obligation that I had because they paid for college. And then I had a brother commit suicide, as you know, and when that happened, I had a civilian job, and then also I was in the reserves, and I wasn't super satisfied doing what I was doing in the reserves. But the Army had a voluntary recall program that you come on to active duty. They gave me an opportunity to be an intel officer, a signal officer. And I was like, I feel like after kind of pouring myself into what I was doing at the time and really making a huge effort and a lot of really good momentum, and I felt empty. I felt completely unfulfilled. And I think it was because I wasn't serving. I wasn't doing anything that really scratched that sort of service itch. And so when I came back in as a signal officer, I don't even think was on my top 10 list when I first got commissioned. And which goes back to sort of connecting the dots to that first one is I was like, but I'm willing to bet that if I learn enough, I could still be a good officer and still be able to serve in some capacity. And then, there's the 9 months later, there was an intervening variable of a couple planes landing into buildings in the Pentagon. And the day I could have gotten out of the Army, I was standing on Pope Airfield with all of our stuff palletized, about to go to Somalia. And then, we got redirected to Afghanistan, but it was like, I guess I'm not getting out. And so recruiting for me was a lot like that experience. And so it was that I was serving, not just the recruiters. It was it was really interesting because I think when you're in a special forces unit, you get really, you homestead and you get used to sort of being in the insular community that you're in with a bunch of other Green Berets and Green Beret families, and they're deploying, they're coming back, and you're deploying and coming back. Like there are guys that were in our group that I don't even know because we were deployed so much in different places that literally were concurrent with me in teams next to mine, but we just never deployed together. And and you're not really, because it's a big military community. So you're not thinking, well, I'm defending Fayetteville. You're thinking like I'm defending America and freedom and all of this other stuff. And you also don't meet a whole lot of 17-year-olds or privates. Because the lowest rank in the special forces unit, at least I think it was then, I think it might be still, is an E6. And so most of the guys, even if they're an X-ray, you're still getting guys that are like 24, 25 years old, and they've had some life experience. And coming back all the way to like it was beautiful. I came into the Army as an active duty guy after that time in the reserves from Los Angeles. And so when I got the opportunity to command the Los Angeles recruiting battalion, I was like, this is just kismet. It's meant to be this way. And I came back full circle back to Los Angeles, and I learned more about that community than I could have ever guessed. Like I had always sort of stuck around in like 3 neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and that's it. As a recruiter, you're everywhere. And That was fantastic. Like, the windshield time is not awesome. The amount of time you spend in a car or an airplane, depending on where you're at, wasn't great, because you can't get anything done because recruiting battalion commanders aren't important enough to get a driver. So you're driving stuff and you can't do any work while you're driving, and I'm in the car sometimes 15 hours a week. And it was like, but being able to go out there and see people do, quote unquote, God's work and really see people change human beings' lives was just bananas. It was so great. And being able to talk to educators who had objections about us being in schools and being graceful toward them and allowing them to be, for us to be humble and them to be open enough for us to actually have good conversations with them, which is, I think, a lot of stuff that I learned as an SF guy in places like Afghanistan, where the Afghan people, I think, were we were benign for the most part. We weren't really there to hurt the Afghan people, but they would have preferred we weren't there. And so it's like being able to still have those hard conversations with people. They're like, "Look, I'm here. We're gonna be here for a while. I'm here to help you. Tell me how I can help you." And a lot of times those were not the things that we wanted to help them with. We were like, "I have to do what? You're so I'm concerned about you stopping indirect fire onto Bagram Airfield. You want us to rebuild a girls' school? All right, let's, I guess, rebuild the girls' school so that then you're going to help us with this indirect fire problem." And it was very much the same thing in like Los Angeles. So I had the opportunity to talk to superintendent of schools. They had a new rating system for their teachers. And in that, like, they needed community service hours. Community service is a big deal for recruiters. So we got, the voluntary service ribbon and like all of the other stuff. So we started comping them time on the weekend to be able to do stuff at the schools, which gave us access to more schools, which gave us access to more kids, and not just more kids across a desk, but more kids where they were meeting recruiters as human beings. And so you're just like, and then I had, I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, but I am a white dude from the Midwest, and I could not go into most of these neighborhoods and recruit somebody. But I had great recruiters that then I gave the flexibility and capacity to, that I was like, "Look, who do you need me to talk to?" And they were like, typically it's the parents. And the parents a lot of times were non-native English speakers. And so for them to then have them talk to me in their native language in a place that they probably hadn't had a Spanish speaking recruiting battalion commander lately was also fantastic. So you're actually talking to them about the things that they're really concerned about, which is their number one, treasure, which is their kids, and how you're educating them on the military writ large, but then also specifically the Army. But then the other thing that we did that I benefited from 20 years of combat was there wasn't a lot of parochialism between the services. When we went through recruiting command, and you remember this, you're trained that the market is your competitor is the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force, and that you're trying to recruit kids against those, and their numbers are compared against our numbers. And I was like, maybe this is me being an SF guy. I was like, I disagree. I don't think there are competitors. I think community colleges are competitors. I think McDonald's and Google are competitors. They're getting better bonuses and better accommodations than we are. So we need to be able to find a way to recruit together and make sure that the recruiter is giving the recruit a prospect a really good customer service experience. So we would recruit with the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines, and we would refer people to each other's services all the time. And for the first time, at least this is what the MEPS commander told us, for the first time in LA MEPS history, we all made our mission. And I would submit that the main reason that we all made our mission, because it was a really tough time for recruiting in the whole country, was because we were all talking to each other and we did joint recruiting events. So, and then we were really fortunate that Eric Garcetti, who is the mayor, was a Navy commander, and he brought LA Fleet Week there. And so he was like, "Hey, I believe in the military, not just the United States Navy, in which case then this big event is going to be all branches and we're all going to go there plus the Coast Guard, and we're going to recruit the hell out of it." I also had the fortune of having been in the reserves in Los Angeles. So we brought in reserve units. We did real stuff with people that were like, "Hey, these are real human beings," and the reserve unit liked it too. And then, the one competitor that maybe was still outstanding was the National Guard. And even for them, we would still bring them in because they had different scholarship paths. They had different ways of getting kids to college. And we were like, We believed, all the commanders at the time, in a community of abundance. We believed that there, within the Los Angeles community, technically between LA and Ventura County, there were 400 possible applicants. 400,000, sorry, possible applicants. We needed conjointly to be able to recruit between 11 and 13,000 a year. And all of us agreed that if we couldn't do that, we were all massive failures. And the main reason that we couldn't be able to do it was because in the past, I think guys they weren't super accustomed to being from there. So I had the fortune of having lived there before, and I had already had a network of people. And then the second part was they weren't leaving their offices because they were so tied. And you know this, there's like, you go to recruiting command and there's like 10% of dudes that are like, no, 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 I'm still going to be a general. And you're like, all right, bro. And so those guys never leave the office because they're constantly talking to the command. And I was like, look, you do whatever you need to do. Go do your wooden paddle for the general when he comes to visit, and extra coins and whatever. Like, I'm going to go recruit kids. Like, people hired me to do this job. At least all the 19 special forces group or special forces background battalion commanders, we all knocked it out of the box because that was all of our approach. We were like, this is probably our last swan song in the United States military as a commander, and we are going to crush this. And so we all did, and we all worked together. The battalions all talked to each other that were in different locales. So we learned from each other really fast because we were used to being, highly deployed and fractured. So we talked to each other. I would talk to my co-battalion commanders probably once a week at least. And that was so odd compared to how everyone else was doing business. And I was like, man, you haven't met SF guys. Like I get when I was a company commander, I had dudes in like 3,000 miles away from each other. And I was like, yeah, I still got to command them. I still got to figure that out. And so, yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to pop in a plane and go visit them. And so I got to trust them, and I got to give them good guidelines, and I got to be able to make sure that they're enabled in a way that I'm providing servant leadership to them. And they're telling me the resource. They know that if they tell me the resources they need, I'm going to try to close the gap.
Yeah, I think your approach, that you're talking about there, Pat, goes back to something, that is really integral to this whole process, is that servant leadership that you mentioned it early on. And is it really is a love? It's an unconditional love. I say it all the time because I don't care what people think about me. Um, I always say, hey, you lead with love, and that all those people who jump in and think that that means that you're going to coddle someone or whatever. And for those that really know me, know that discipline is an important part of
Love. Yeah.
and it's but it is interesting to watch it play out, and couldn't help but hear from what you were saying there is that what was really driving you is for the community, love for the people, love for the individual. And it was something was funny to me about I did a completely different type of recruiting, soft recruiting. So the people I had to talk to were Army division commanders and their sergeant majors, right? And so I would go there, right? I was unafraid to talk to them because I talk to those guys all the time. Usually a one-way conversation directed at me, but this consulting, I could initiate the conversation, right? So I would go meet with them, and I would say, hey, I want to come to your installation. And oh, by the way, I know when you're deploying, because this was during Iraq and Afghanistan. I know when all your brigades are deploying. I know when they're all going to NTC and JRTC. And I have windows of when we will and won't take soldiers. Invariably, the sergeant major would always say something like, oh, your recruiters are blah, blah, blah. And that was a very direct way to deal with that, right? I whipped out my notebook and I would say, okay, Sergeant Major, if you can give me the name of the soldier.
Yeah, I did the same stuff. Yeah.
I will go find out which recruiter, because I will find out, and trust me, I will. And it was always, oh yeah, and I never got a name, So then I would look at the division commander and be like, okay, so can we put aside rumor and innuendo and deal with like really recruiting soldiers, and it would get down to it's like, hey, I want to come here with SFCA, SIOP, EOD, the local ROTC unit, all of these organizations, and oh by the way, the last person I want the soldiers to see as they leave this recruiting event, whether it's at the NCO club or wherever we rented, on base, is your retention guy.
Mhm.
Like, I just want to keep good soldiers in the Army, right?
Mhm.
So if they come in there, they want to be SF, they want to be a Ranger, they want to be CA, PSYOP, EOD, They
Yeah.
want to join the army band. I don't care. I just want to keep them in the army. And then, just like you were saying, you get cooperation, right? Because then the division sergeant major is going to send an email to every soldier right, to every subordinate saying, hey, this career fair is the soldier's place of duty, right? Because then how can they deny, right? But if you say, hey, I'm just going to come here and get SF guys, or you don't talk to them, right? And you
Mm.
allow rumor and innuendo to rule the day, right? Because the only way you get rid of it is like to shine a flashlight on it, right? It's like, oh, if you're going to accuse me of doing something, then give me the specifics. Like, tell me the soldier, tell me
Yeah.
the unit. And I think that's the same thing you were talking about there. And
It's funny because so we had a school district that's independent school district called the Inglewood School District that has a lot of folks in it and a lot of folks that would be qualified, but highly African American. The Inglewood community is typically all African American, and literally from Boys in the Hood, like we're trying to kill black and brown kids. And I was like, and no one had gone and talked to them. No one had talked to the principal or the superintendent. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna get blasted in the process of this because I could get called a white savior. I could get all this stuff. I was like, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's go do this. And when it came down to it, I was like, why don't you give us a chance to just provide some opportunities to some of your kids that maybe aren't going to be able to afford to go to college, would like to be, we have 116 jobs in the Army, would like to be an X-ray tech or a airplane mechanic or whatever. I feel, and I would challenge them when they would say things like it was almost verbatim. They would say the same stuff. Well, we had a career recruiter, blah, blah, blah. I was like, here's my card with my personal cell phone number. If there's ever an issue with any recruiter from any service on your campus, please give me a call. We meet with the other commanders, the other recruiting every month. And this is the very first thing that we talk about. And we will get to the bottom of it, period. And they were like, really? And I was like, really? And so, and that was one part of it. The second part was, now let me engage you and help me, get through your objection so that I can give up. It's exactly what you're talking about. I want to give opportunity to these kids. And if it's not going to be for every kid, but I don't want them to not know or pass up an opportunity that would have been exactly right for them. And what's funny is I don't know, it's probably a character thing that I've developed at some point earlier in my life from my dad or from a religious thing, and that you reinforced it as my company commander ages and ages ago, is that my retention of my units as a commander in the Army was always super high. And I put a lot of dudes out of the Army. So it wasn't and so it's not like I was afraid of doing the administrative separation or whatever we needed to do. It was that when guys wanted to get out, I'd be like, "Okay, what can I do to keep you? Do you need to change an MOS? Do you need to find a different unit? Do you need to get a different job? Do you want to go to a school that you haven't that's been passed by? What can I do to retain you?" And then the second question would be, if for sure you are getting out, what is your plan and how can I help you? And they would be like aghast because you and I both lived through a couple other commanders that would give them the coward shame speech. And I was like, that is never going to come out of my mouth because we are the 1% of the nation that has raised their hand, that has served more than anyone. And so like it's the same thing that would happen when these parents would talk to us. Like, man, I don't want my kid to be gone for 20 years. I was like, let's just be honest with you. As long as they do the initial 2 or 3, whatever it is, I'm good. Because if they go in and have a 2 to 3 year great experience and they turns out that it's not right for them, I want them to come back and go to USC because those are the kids right now. And I'd be like, oh, and by the way, have you met Ramon, who is a current student in the engineering program at USC, who is a Ranger contract dude, spent 3 years in the Ranger battalions and got out, which I'm sure they didn't like, but at the same time ended up getting out and now went to college. And his first thing out of his mouth was, I never thought I would go to college, much less this college, which is right down the street from where I lived, because no one other than my parents had ever encouraged me to do it. And he goes, and when I got in the Army, I couldn't, I couldn't escape it. Every commander or supervisor I had would talk to me about when I was going to school, where I was going to school, what I was doing to make myself better. And he's like, and it was constant. And he goes, and because of that, now I am not only doing this to make my parents proud, but I'm also doing it to make those guys proud because a lot of those guys, it's hard for them to see me leave. And I was like, this is the story. Like, this kid needs to tell us. I don't need to recruit. We need to send some guy to Fort Knox. I need to get this kid out there and have him just tell his story because that's all we need.
Pat, I think for those that don't know, it's kind of come out here, right? You had that sort of non-traditional career path from from actor, to reservist, to active duty, special forces, and and as you mentioned, you getting a Purple Heart after being blown through a wall. I think I'm not sure if it was a close or similar when you were bitten by the cobra. So
Yeah, same year. It was a rough year for mom.
oh, and then coming back, right? And that's something I think also doesn't come out enough. What kind of organization sort of breeds that loyalty, right? That where someone would be injured that bad, and the only thing they can think of is returning to serve. When you talk to veterans when they come out, how do you relay that there is this path that you're representing in business ownership that's maybe for some a non-traditional path?
So I think part of it is there's two different things that I'd like to talk about real quick. So one is there was a question that was asked even this past week. What's something that you recommend to veterans as they're getting out that helps with their transition process? And I think a lot of guidance is, read Simon Sinek's Your Why, go to a transition organization, whatever. There's a specific thing, however, that the Honor Foundation does that I think is really interesting. That's great. It's the 50 cups of coffee. And like after you get about 15 cups of coffee deep, you start running out of the people you could just call. And now you have to start going to secondary connections or people you haven't talked to in a long time. And I think that's where if you're open to it and you're vulnerable in those conversations, you tell people what really sparks your interest, you're gonna get I think people in general are very generous and they're just not asked. And at least within the veteran community for most of us. And so ask. So allow people to be generous. I think veterans have a really hard time accepting generosity because it feels like a handout and we haven't earned it. I think a lot of veterans even cringe every time we get thanked for our service. But the second part, though, is that how do we talk to veterans about understanding their capability? It's really it's sort of you bring up the obvious sort of antiseptic data points of veterans in World War II from all over the country, not college educated. A lot of them ended up running companies at a much higher percentage rate than is happening now. It is within our wheelhouse that this is something that we should be able to and be capable of doing. The real thing that we talk about though is that it's the call to action, the call to arms. So what is seen by some as an opportunity, a financial opportunity or capital opportunity, because so many businesses are going to be transitioning out in the next, 10 years, 9 million businesses, is quite frankly actually a crisis. And if those companies all get rolled up and become single aggregated entities, small businesses and small communities are going to disappear. Suburban environments are going to be next. And because all of those businesses that are the individually owned businesses, call it, a small accounting firm, it could be an HVAC company, it could be a tooling firm, whatever it happens to be. Those are all supported by professional services of accountants, lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. When you aggregate everything, all those people move, which is all your upper middle class income people, which means all the nice houses leave, which means that the housing market crashes. So like Quad Cities, Iowa, we had a guy that both you and I know was there doing a skill bridge, and they're like ringing the alarm bell, saying that they're afraid that they're going to lose 30% of their small businesses in the next 10 years. And if that happens, it could potentially cause a Rust Belt type crisis within smaller cities and communities. And so what it comes down to is that this is another calling for veterans to serve their country and their community by going back and actually doing the thing that we were trained to do.
Leading well.
And and not doing it alone, but doing it within a network of people. And it reminds me a little bit of like the call to action during Robin Sage, where you're like, we need to establish the auxiliary and we need to start engaging because we don't want it to become a full blown war. But if we don't start stemming the tide in some sort of asymmetric manner, and the outcome, the outputs are fantastic, I think, for veteran psychological health. I think it's great for communities and families to be able to get their kids back home. I think it's good for the stabilization of our economy, but also our political networks, and where you're getting folks back home and getting them leading again instead of having all veterans ending up in large metropolitan areas where our impact is mitigated by the fact that there's a lot of people there. And if you go into a smaller place, I mean, you live in a smaller place, like by being a good person, that a lot of it has been, and a lot of people I'm sure look up to you for your service, is that that's a great way to then demonstrate to them that the Army invested in the right person. And by the way, now I'm going to bring your tax dollars home. I'm going to show you what I was trained, because the military training or the leadership training that you get in the military, business schools can't even replicate. In the best business schools, they can't replicate it. And so it's the thing that you constantly, it's what good business schools, why they recruit veterans so much, because they want us to be the leaders on their small groups when they're going to business school, because they want us, because that's what we do. Most veterans, though, in the first semester of business school are reticent to be involved in anything. We're just trying to keep our head above water and learn all the finance stuff and don't want to fail. And like at Duke specifically, if you started looking at how all the groups, the small groups and projects were developed by the last semester, it was a veteran leading almost every single one. And that's the secret sauce to Duke, is that's why they recruit us. And so it's, they know, because they need to measure the metric of it. It's sometimes lost when you go to a large corporation, because I mean, I worked in a pretty large corporation, and it's a data point. It gives you points, but it's not something that is going to have an outsized impact versus all the other people that are highly educated, multiple advanced degrees, et cetera, that are within the same company.
Yeah. And common thread you keep hitting back to also can be relayed back to fear, right? So you have veterans that may think, hey, the easy button is defense contracting because I know somebody, they're going to pull me in. I can go there, like you said. Where am I going to get paid? So when you're asking someone to go, or not even asking them, but inviting them, right? Like, hey, there's a non-traditional career path here. It's a way to serve. It's a way to serve your country. How do you help people deal with some of those fears?
Well, a couple different things. One, I think that, like, I'm of the opinion, hit the easy button first. Like, at the end of the day, there's a couple of different benefits. There's a lot of guys that are sort of at the crux of, should I go into defense contracting? I think someone's, I've got a good job offer. I'm basically doing the same thing I used to do. Does that make me, a quitter? Did I not try to do something else? Do I not have an imagination or any other value? I think it's go get a job, and then from that, like, work within a network and a community of people. Don't, like, search for a business alone, operate for a business alone. There's and it reminds me a little bit about, like, the kids that were terrified to join the military because they didn't know anyone else who had joined. And then they would go and they'd be like, "Oh, wow. I got a battle buddy, I got a squad leader, I got a platoon sergeant, I got all these people. I a sergeant major, and maybe I got a lot more attention than I ever imagined I would get." But you're definitely not alone. One thing in the military you can be certain of is that you're not alone. And so in in if you work within, whether it's our organization or a different organization, whatever, is that there's a lot of people who want to see veterans succeed in this. And I was blessed with having a network of people that I could pull together within one organization that all want to do that. And that includes not just the people that are other veterans or business owners, but that includes the allied service provider network. That includes the coaches and the advisors they get. That even includes the banks that we work with. They want to see veterans succeed. And so the fact, it comes up sometimes, but what is interesting about a lot of veterans is that they're considered curious, which is a really key component to being a good entrepreneur. They are courageous, so they understand, and courageous meaning they understand risk mitigation, residual risk, and still being able to do something. So not like I'm just running into a burning building for burning building's sake. And then the third thing is that they're community to community, and that typically is either literally a community, a geography, a zip code, or it's a community of people. And then the last thing is that they are coachable. So a lot of the a lot of other folks don't take input very well. Veterans, especially veterans that are a little bit nervous but feel supported, are having that sort of fear adjacent feeling, ask a ton of questions. And it's crazy how much sellers like that. Like the curiosity that comes in with that ability to be coached by the guy leaving the company, and that sense of sometimes intrepidation I think that we have when we're taking over a unit from someone else, especially God forbid, someone else who did an astounding job and you're like, great, I'm going to be a complete cheap facsimile of this guy at best, is that you come in to that and then you have to be able to be authentic and be able to care about people, meet them where they're at and serve them. And then in whether it's a small business or corporate America, I think it's the thing that in leadership is missing most is authenticity and the ability or that inherent gift to serve others is that in a leadership role, and it's just missing. And because no one teaches it. The only place that I know for a fact that it's taught is either in religious service maybe of some type or in social service or the military. Those are the only places, or maybe, medical first responders sort of stuff. But it's the fact that you can go from having such an intense feeling of service toward others. And I do believe that it's based in love. I think the two driving emotions that every human has is fear and love. And I think that that sounds corny as hell, but it's like choose love. Is that ultimately it's but love is discipline. Love is being able to have confrontations and conflict in a respectful way. Love is being able to say this isn't the right time or place or it's going to work out and I have to respect the other person's wishes or goals. Um, Love is being able to be vulnerable and accessible to people. Love is being, self-love is making sure that you're taking care of yourself because a leader that's not taking care of himself can't take care of other people. And so like all of that stuff is at the end of the day, the I sound like I'm John Lennon, but it all comes down to love. I mean, quite frankly.
I In fact, we've had this conversation a lot in, here in the podcast, so you're not alone, and, yeah, we've had that conversation about, when you really trying to heal yourself for mental wellness, one of the key components is allowing being vulnerable, right? Which means sometimes your ego has to step to the side, and we all know, a primary driver of ego is fear, right? I
Yes.
got better, somebody's gonna be better than me, somebody's gonna be fat, right? And it's fear is the tool that the ego uses to do a lot of driving. So if you could make wave a magic wand and make one thing about veteran transition better or different, what would that be?
Um, this is oversimplified, and I don't really have a solution to it. Like I could be like, hey, if whatever the Department of Defense just did this, everything would be better. But ultimately, a lot of it's education about access to resources. Like I just don't think it's clear. Like even like in the mental health space, great example. So I for the first time ever just met someone from Task Force Dagger, and they were like, "Oh, we do all this stuff," and I was like, "What?" And I've been out I've been in the special operations community my whole career, pretty much in active duty at least, and this is the first time I've ever even heard about what they do. And I was like and then I started dialing it back, and I was like, "How would I have found out?" And I don't know. Like, there's not like a like, am I just ignorant? Or is it that there's really no comprehensive guide that says, "Hey, here everybody that's getting out through TAP. here are all the nonprofits that we've vetted, maybe having an independent vetting organization that could vet people. And then from that, be able to say, here are the ones that are in the mental health space. Here are the ones that are in the employment space. Here are the ones that are in this other space, maybe community space, whatever, family space. And then here are the ones that are all valid. And like I was thinking about it when I was at this thing this week. It's like there's all these nonprofits at these events, like the military influencer conference. I was like, we all get validated with like Charity Navigator or whatever. Like, why is there not a certification system for veteran charities that says in order to do that, you have to register, you have to say what it is you have to do what it is you say you do. And so, like, that's the other part too, is that there's a lot of drift, I feel, within the nonprofit support space for people for veterans because they drift to where the money is and it's not their core mission. And it gets really muddy then between different organizations as to whether or not you're competing anymore because now you drifted because this one donor said, hey, if you just did this thing, I'm going to give you this dollar amount. And you're like, well, I guess we do that thing now. And you're like, yeah, but this other organization already does that. Yeah, but I think we could do it better. And that's generally not the case. Generally, the case is you're just doing it also. And now the consumer, which is the veteran, has no idea what the difference between the two things are. And like,
or how to get access to it. Now, that's
you're like, what are the great examples? So when I was getting out, here's a complaint. So when I was getting out, I transitioned in recruiting. Our transition out of recruiting is awful. So you are typically at a remote location, and in that remote location, not near a military base. Now you have to just go to the nearest military base, which you've never been to, and you have to transition out. You have to go to their TAP program. You have to do all this stuff. So, as a Purple Heart recipient, when I retired out of the military, I had a waiver that I could have transferred my post 9/11 GI benefits to my son. The people leading my course just didn't know that there was the waiver, and I don't know how they would have known to ask me. But when I asked them, could I transfer my benefits, they said you needed 18 months, which is correct for most of the population. I wasn't aware of the fact that because I had a waiver, I couldn't do it. So I just took their answer and I was like, that's it. Now, retroactively, I've been told you can fix it, but I'm like, how? And the recommendation I've been given, this is after talking to congressmen, this is after, is that because it's actually monitored or it's assessed by the Department of the Army, whatever service you were in, and then it's then transferred over to the VA, is that, well, I just got to call the Department of the Army. And I was like, last I checked, Department of the Army doesn't have a 1-800 number that I could just be like, hey, I have an issue. Can you fix my issue? And then when I got to past that first hurdle, they were like, well, you need to prove that you weren't briefed this. And I was like, what? Like, how am I going to prove a negative? Like that makes no sense at all. And I've been trying to deal with this now for like a year and a half, 2 years. And similarly, as a nonprofit, which is really hard because you have your donors that are sometimes tied to the mission, you have ego of typically the CEO or founder for their organization. If someone else is doing what you're doing better, step aside and help them. Like merge instead of say we're going to just do the same thing, because veterans do not benefit from two organizations that are kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, well, I think that absence of information that you talk about leads to other organizations being formed, right? Because then you're a veteran, you're like, hey, I needed this service, and there was nobody there to provide it, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
start.
Well, I completely agree. I would submit, yeah, that a lot of the genesis of new veteran organizations is because you couldn't figure out who did what. And then you create an organization because it's not that hard to create a nonprofit. And then once you do that, you're like, oh, shoot, I've been doing this now for 3 years. Turns out there's 20 other organizations that do it. I just never heard of them.
Yeah, I think that's so. What I'm hearing is we need to make the transition process better by better informing veterans as they're getting out on what's available. And that would require someone to know, right?
Yeah, and it really does, I think, come down to what if the VA really it's the Department of Defense, right, through the Transition Assistance Program, would be the regulator of record that would be able to institute something. But it would be them, I think, that there should be some sort of ideally not massively bureaucratic way to be able to say, okay, within our space, you can get our certification if one, you can validate the fact that you do a different thing than some other organization. If not, here's our recommendation, go work for that organization. Because that is also a great thing too, because sometimes those organizations haven't, just like any company, they haven't been able to do their mission because they've just gotten tired. They've been doing the same thing for a long period of time, and they do need fresh blood. The second part would be to then take all those certified entities and give it as a, whether it's an AI facilitated platform or whatever, but have it live in the VA page where you could be like, hey, now I type in, I need mental health services, and here's my background that I've fed in my DD-214, and now they could be like, here's the 17 different organizations that you have access to. Like I just found out I have eligibility to work within Folds of Honor for education stuff because I'm a Purple Heart recipient. I was like, that I have no idea. And that's just word of mouth stuff. And I was like, man, there aren't that many out of Iraq and Afghanistan. There aren't even that many Purple Heart recipients. And no one tells me anything. Like I'm not on some distro list. And so it's like there aren't that many of us.
So if I'm a veteran out there and I'm like, hey, I'm listening to this conversation and I'm interested in and potentially interested in business ownership. What's the first step they need to take?
Yeah, for us, I mean, other than if like I'm always open to somebody contacting me through LinkedIn. My name's Patrick Michael Flood, I think, on LinkedIn, and then connecting me for a 15-minute or half hour cup of coffee. I don't mind. I'd find if I if I like the most things that I was satisfied by being a commander was the amount of time I spent with soldiers, just helping them do mundane, like balance a checkbook. Let's go return a vehicle to the lemon lot because some sergeant major took advantage of you. Like like all that stuff like gave me so much satisfaction. I don't mind the 15-minute to half hours. I always block times during the week to be able to do that. But if you're a little bit further along and it's not just a conversation with me that helps, then it's really going to our website, which is www.ownersinhonor.org. The website's very clear about how the program works. If there's any questions, there's always places on the website you could ask interrogatives or click in it. But if you're interested in buying a business or you're a veteran who's considering selling a business, there's two different tabs. One says buy a business, the other one says sell a business. For buy a business, it's how you get initially brought into the program. You're going to get an interview, and then we're going to talk to you about where you're at and where you need to be, what modules you need to be able to complete. If you're a seller, we're bringing people in manually right now because we don't have a gigantic influx of veteran-owned businesses that are trying to sell. And then you kind of come in and we'll connect you to resources and give you referrals if applicable to make sure that you can get a good valuation for your business, sell it well. In a perfect world, it's the virtuous circle of a veteran-owned business selling to another veteran and then mitigating part of the crisis that's happening right now in ownership of all businesses in the country, which is bloodline generational turnover. That if you could turn those bloodline generational turnover businesses into turnover businesses from veteran to veteran, we're going to mitigate a big part of that problem.
And Pat, if I'm somebody watching this and I want to support Owners in Honor, how do people support? How do
Yeah, there's a couple different, so it's, what is it? Time, talent, and treasure. So time, what does time mean? So time means that we always could use volunteers to be able to do events. We do about 22 events a year. We're at 18 different universities throughout the country. We're always looking for, especially Student Veteran Association interns to be able to work at those colleges to help us liaise with them. We want to make sure that we're getting the best bang of our buck, but also to be able to create a dual value proposition for those kids that are interning to put something on the resume when they are going out to the market and looking for stuff. Talent also includes, people that could be allied service providers, people that could be, which includes M&A attorneys, accounting firms, HR firms, you name it, to include veteran business owners that are interested in mentoring someone through the process. So every month we have a co-coaching circle of people that coach people within the search platform. And then it's just them talking to each other, very lightly moderated. That'd be great. And then the treasure is always, we're a nonprofit, so it always helps for people to donate to us directly. We take donations of any size to include stock donations, a lot of other non-traditional donations. And the impact that happens is, so it costs a veteran about $100,000 to go through the whole program. Costs us $100,000. Costs about $10,000 a year. Take any other standard traditional transition program, it's about $10,000 for about 3 to 4 months. So we're low cost, high output organization that then has outsized economic impact for the United States. So anytime that is helpful as well.
Right on. Hey, Pat, I appreciate your time, brother.
Thank you.